Leeds saw some of the worst floods in living memory. Unprecedented rain meant we saw some of the highest river levels ever recorded. Many of us were enjoying the Boxing Day festivities with family and friends. Others were about to see their livelihoods swept from beneath them.
We need to do much more to ensure that this bit of the river is better protected in the future, so businesses and homes are better protected in the future.
As it was rising, we knew the extent that it was going to be bad. We needed to save as much as we could.
We as a community were really out of communication with each other.
It's devastating really to hear people talk about it, and businesses that aren't there anymore who have been in families for generations.
If anything, what happened last year happens again, I think a lot of business, including me, will never trade again.
There are businesses still waiting to reopen. Others had to close completely, while some homeowners have only just moved back in. The impact of the flooding was astronomical, hitting communities all along the River Aire. And over the next half hour, the On the Air news team will be revisiting some of those still trying to rebuild their lives 1 year on.
It's not the first full bucket to empty, and it certainly won't be the last.
The last event, the water very nearly came over in the same way as this. We just avoided it then, and we predicted that this was a disaster waiting to happen.
But first, people across the city are continuing to count the cost of the worst flooding in 70 years, with organisations today coming forward to announce official financial support set to be implemented.
It just kept coming and the pressure building up, and once it got above knee height, I knew that I can't save it. All downstairs was completely up, full of water, the whole restaurant.
We do have a flood defence wall here, as you can see, but it came completely over the top of it. It was just unprecedented.
We've been working with professional partners to mitigate the impacts of the flooding on the local communities.
There seems to me to be a big imbalance between the amount of expenditure on flood defences in certain parts of the country compared to what's happened here in the north, particularly the cancellation of a very important flood defence in Leeds.
We can never allow this tragedy to happen again. What will the Minister do?
It's coming to the end of 2016 and we start on the River Aire in Leeds city centre as works continue with the construction of the Leeds Flood Alleviation Scheme. Starting in January 2015 and costing in the region of £50 million, Phase 1 is one of the largest river flood defence schemes in the country. It comprises of work starting along the river near to Thwaite Mills, extending 4 kilometres through the city beyond Leeds train station. Movable weirs at Crown Point and Nostrop can be lowered in flood conditions to reduce river levels and the threat of flooding. It's the first time this kind of technology has been installed in the UK for flood defence purposes. It's unclear whether the weirs would have entirely prevented flooding in the centre last year, but engineers say they should significantly reduce the risk. As we know, they weren't ready and parts of the city were engulfed. Airbar can be found right on the river in the city on the Calls. This is their busiest time of year. In 2015, however, the festivities were cut short when Storm Eva caused 5 feet of water to pour through vents, resulting in massive damage. I first met Colin Deakin and his staff when the bar fully reopened. Today I'm back to see how they're doing a year on. Like others, Colin worked hard to ensure this place could open again. The close of 2015 will be something he'll never forget. If I can take you back to Boxing Day, what were the emotions that you were going through at the time? It must have been exceptionally scary to see the water rise.
I've been here for nearly 5 years, and to see, in essence, all your hard work in 5 years just ruined, just like that. It was really, I've never ever gone through anything like that, and hopefully I won't ever go through it again.
You do have a business that's really close to the river. Others not so far away, perhaps in Kielesz, have had to close completely. Does it change your perception of having a business that is riverside?
I wouldn't change it. Wouldn't change it for anything. If someone said to me, go run another bar, or there's another bar, not all. It's a new unique bar. It's one of a kind in Leeds city centre, so no.
Air Bar is in a picturesque setting. Lovely, I'm told, during our fairer seasons, a bit nippy in winter. It's easy to see why this business, like many, are truly exposed to the elements and at the mercy of the river. Colin, though, does take some comfort from the new defences.
You can't run a business thinking, what if? You can't always look, it's going to be doom and gloom, oh, it's raining, let's get the sandbags out. Now, like you say, with the flood defences, I've got new windows and doors, floodgates where it came through, so fingers crossed it's not going to get tested. That'd be nice, but I've been reassured that it will keep the water out.
The devastation caused by the floods prompted the government to commit £35 million to further enhance flood protection in our city through to 2021. Only recently, the alleviation scheme secured a further £3.8 million to increase the current standard of protection for Phase 1. The Environment Agency claims that the city centre will now be protected for events happening once in 100 years, even allowing for climate change.
These events are going to be repeated. We don't know exactly where or what the impact will be, but the weather patterns are showing us very clearly that we can expect more serious, very heavy rainfall in the future, and we have to do everything we can to make sure that those businesses, those residential properties alongside our rivers get the protection, as much protection as they possibly can.
But Phase 1 only stretches so far. In 2011, plans for Leeds were downgraded. £180 million was once the amount of money committed by the government to defences in Leeds. Protection of Kielesz, not too far from here of course, was removed from those plans and funding slashed. However, December 2015 caused the government to think again. Christian Johnson can take up the story of the inner city suburb that this year has been thrust into the political spotlight. On the 26th of December 2015, Leeds was hit by the worst flooding in over 70 years. In just 24 hours, emergency services in West Yorkshire were called over 600 times. According to Leeds City Council, nearly 2,700 properties were affected in the city and 678 businesses were also hit.
And again, the water was up to the ceiling, so the water started pouring in here and basically took everything with it, which included the ceilings, the walls, the lifts.
The damage was costly. Nearly £1 million has been paid out in business and support grants since. In the city centre, we've seen some of the effects of the flooding, with this scheme being built to significantly reduce the risk of flooding in the future. We began our journey up the river towards Kielesz, where some of the 50 businesses that were damaged are yet to be fully operational. Some had to close completely. Kielesz was one of 14 wards in the city affected by the floods, but not all felt the impact of an overflowing River Aire. To the north of the city, residents in Wetherby were some of the first to experience flooding. The wharf was overwhelmed too, and by the end of Boxing Day morning, damage had already been done. Upstream, communities became divided when Linton Bridge, the only throughway from Linton to neighbouring Collingham, was rendered unusable. The bridge remains closed to traffic today, and Leeds City Council have confirmed a £4.5 million investment into repair work already underway. Approximately 14 miles further upstream across the northern border of the city is Otley. In December 2015, the market town had a fight of its own. As well as communities being more vigilant and learning how to better protect themselves and their properties, the aftermath of the floods showed how those in the city relied on each other to get back on their feet again. It wasn't just in Otley that we've seen this togetherness. Back in the west of the city, the Bridge Inn led by example. Volunteers offered their support when they'd seen on social media that the pub had been overwhelmed with water, flooding the entire downstairs and devastating the much-loved beer garden. The pub has been flooded numerous times before, but never on the scale seen in 2015. Thanks to the help of locals, they opened just a few days after Boxing Day, and 1 year on, the bank has new fencing, with the garden fully restored, though stark reminders remain. Deputy Leader of Leeds City Council, Lucinda Yeadon, was one of those who rallied residents at that crucial time.
I think it just really illustrates how strong the local community is here, and how much you're right that people do love it, and it's part of our identity as this community.
It's been quite a year for Kirkstall. We've seen some businesses unfortunately fold as a result of the flood, some still yet to open, some have managed to open and get back to some kind of normality. What's it been like for you as councillor in this ward, speaking to people who were affected by the floods?
It's devastating really to hear people talk about it, and businesses that aren't there anymore who have been in families for generations, and because of what happens on one Boxing Day have either had to change how they do business, what their model of business is, what they actually do, or close completely, and speaking to them, and it's really upsetting.
The big question, a year on, what happens next?
Well, I think it's really important that we, first of all, recognise the whole reason the city is here and that Leeds has developed in the way it has is because we have this river. And yes, it can be a threat at times, but it's also a massive asset. And I think my relationship with this bit of water has certainly changed over the past year, and we need to respect it and look after it, and a lot of work's been taking place to do that. But we also need to know that in those times when it's a threat, that we're prepared, that we know what to do during the flooding, and that if it was to happen again, we can respond properly. But also recognise that actually we're a really strong community, and we've got through a really difficult time.
Boxing Day 2015 will go into the record books, but 1 year on, Leeds is still recovering. What's clear though is that despite the chaos and devastation caused by the flooding, the spirit and togetherness of communities was felt across the city in the aftermath of Storm Eva. What is still unclear though is whether Leeds as a whole will be better protected and prepared in the future. The authorities say they've learnt from what was claimed to be a once in a 200-year weather event. For the people in our city, it was one too many.